Hello, everyone, and welcome to the front row. Thank you so much for joining us. As you all know, this is a part of our series that is a combination of a partnership between myself, the founder of Versatile Books, Jareen McGorm, and the founder of Semicolon Bookstore, which is an indie bookstore here in Chicago. And so we are so excited to do this series of just amazing authors that many of the children and schools that I work with read, and also that the books that Semicolon holds. And so tonight for our front row conversation, we have the wonderful Jewell Parker Rhodes. And and I'm so excited for this conversation. Just so you know, Jewell, I also here, starting this Saturday, we kick off our book club, and many of your books have been books that my young readers have read. And so I was just excited to even get a response that you would be open to do this, because I just love your work. And so I'm excited to have this conversation. And and I'm excited to just see just the questions that come in. So as people are starting to log in, I see them, the viewers coming in. This is very much so an open conversation. So if there's a question or something you want me to pose to Jewell, just put it in the comments. I will make sure that I share it as we go through this opportunity to talk to her. So the first thing I want to start with is the beginning. Okay, so the beginning. Tell us, how did you become who you are, Jewell? Like, what was the beginning?
Well,
wherever you want to start,
Well, it took a long time, and I apologize to everybody for being late. I've been working very hard finishing, which I think will be my 18th book.
Wow.
But actually, when I was a little girl, I loved to read. I loved stories, and I would write all the time. My grandmother, who was a great hoodoo lady, she used to tell me stories all the time. So they're my puppies. So it was like absolutely wonderful. But I didn't know that Black people wrote books. So it wasn't until I was a junior in college that I went into the library and I saw a book on a shelf that was about, the slave trade, written by a Black woman. And it was like, what? Black women write books? And I immediately switched my major into the English department to study creative writing. So I'm actually the writer who almost didn't get their beginning. Back in my days, all the books were about white experiences. All of them were written by white people. None of my teachers, ever said, you can do this. I hadn't had any role models. So I consider myself very blessed that I found my start. Yeah. But it wasn't real easy, because when I was in creative writing classrooms, my colleagues who were all white would say, Jewell, why didn't you tell me your characters were Black? And I go, well, why don't you tell me your characters are white? Right. But I learned that we, in my generation, I had learned to read white. That not unless, because everything was white, and not unless an author, said I'm a different color, there's a different. Did I know? But I started wanting to write from my experience and follow this example of this African American woman who was writing about our people, going all the way back to the African diaspora. But it took me about 10 years to write my first novel. And actually, when that book went out, I was by then about, early 30s. I actually got letters from editors saying, Black people don't read books, so therefore we can't. Wow. Yeah, some real serious stuff. Yeah. At the time, I was writing about Louisiana and voodoo, and a woman who was a priestess named Marie Laveau. So it was an adult novel. So let me just say real quick, and I'll wind this part down, that I started and I wrote adult novels for 30 years. But I always knew that I wanted to write for youth, but I didn't think I was good enough. So actually, I spent 30 years practicing. I needed to get ready for children, because children, they deserve the very, very best. And actually, the day that Hurricane Katrina hit, which was 15 years ago, I had an adult novel that was published that same day. And 2 weeks later, my publisher sent me down to New Orleans, for book sales. That city, more important things going on than, buying books. Things were closed. People were, it's like, right now go on book tour while we're in a pandemic. Are you kidding me? Or wildfires. It was just crazy. But when I was there, it was this revelation of what about the children? What about the animals? And that was when my very first children's book idea came. And that was Ninth Ward about Hurricane Katrina. Yeah. So since that time, now it's been 6 young adult books. I think this week, I just finished my 7th. And now I'm the happiest. I'm at the beginning that I wanted to be at, a children's author. I got all these other 30 years hanging on to me. So I wish I could go on back.
No, but I really love what you just shared, because it leads to my next question of just like, what's your inspirations? And I have done my homework on you and just read and just saw that one of the things that you spoke to is it's so important that children hear their voice when they're reading, right? So a lot of times when, even for me, when I'm working with middle school students and high school students and getting them, trying to get them into a book club, the whole idea of reading, sometimes if it hasn't already become a love, is associated with work, right? They don't hear their voice. They don't see it as pleasure. It's different when I'm working with my younger kids and getting them to understand just the beauty of reading. But by that age, it's this is boring. I don't see the point of it. But I love hearing you say that you write in such a way that they can hear their voice, right? And that you're thinking about what is a child at that age? What are they feeling? What are they thinking? What are they, what are they experiencing? And I believe that that's so true, because the books that my kids have read from you, it's because of that. They're it's easy to read. It's something that I can connect to. I don't feel as if I have to do all this extra work, but yet it's still rigorous and challenging in the concepts,
Oh,
so
my goodness. You describe perfectly what I try to do. And I'm thankful for that very, very much. Because actually, it's like my grandmother, the African-American oral tradition. Grandma told me these stories that had so much wisdom. Now, my grandmother never finished 3rd grade, but there was a sense of talking, or the men in the barber shop, or just elders that you sit and you listen to this rich storytelling, and you don't need 50-cent words when you can do a 5-cent word that's just as perfect and opens up the story. And then I always try to write with passion. So I can't write any story not unless I hear the character's voice. So even right now, if you ask me to recite, the opening pages of Ninth Ward, I could do it, because I have, I memorize, because I get so into the language and the rhythm. And that's the beauty, I think, of our culture. I was working with on a step book and talking to a woman this morning, and she was talking how for step, you got to catch the rhythm. And I think this happens with our storytelling. You got to catch the rhythm. And lots of teachers tell me that there's a wide range of students that can read my books. And some of them will say, we would love it because we have reluctant readers, or readers who are behind grade level, but they can still read your books. That's wonderful. I don't think that that's dumbing anything down at all. It's just of the porch, grandmother talking. But the concepts, I find, because they are sophisticated, then you have that reluctant reader, or somebody who's now a 9th or 10th grader. It might be an easy read, but it's easy in the words, but it's not easy on their soul or easy on their mind. They have a lot to think of. And I love that, because I have people from 4th grade all the way up to 10th grade reading my work, and adults too, but that I have a wide range, because it has, meat on the bones. And it has a voice that's calling to you and saying, you've heard me before, haven't you? You heard this in your community. You heard some elders talk this way. So if you notice, in all my books, I have an elderly Black woman character. And
Yes.
that's the only character that's based on anybody. That's my grandmother.
Mm.
Unconditional love. So whenever you read any of my books or in Ghost Boys, the grandmother in Ghost Boys, they're all inspired by the love that my grandmother gave me and her wisdom.
Oh, I love it. I love it. As you all are tuning in, as I see more people coming in, please share this live. We are here having a wonderful conversation with Jewell Parker Rhodes, and we're just talking about her background and what inspires her writing. Also, we will be throughout this. Later on, I'll be putting a link so that you can win a copy of this this wonderful book that we're going to talk about next. And I'm so excited because, as you just spoke to, just wanting to speak to what people are feeling, I believe that this book is so telling of current times and currently what we're feeling and what we're saying, right? And so as you're in here and you're listening to our conversation, if you have a question for Jewell, or if you want to just say you agree, this is just like if we were in the porch.
Yeah, we're on the porch.
Okay, we're just on the porch talking right now. So if you put in the comments, I'll make sure it comes up, and I'll make sure I ask her throughout. And then again, just share so that many people can watch. And so my next thing I wanted to talk about is just that, Ghost Boys.
Ghost Boys.
Can you speak to, first of all, the title itself, right? I think that I'm always big. I have an 8-year-old son, and before we read any book, I'm like, if you see this title, what does it make you feel? And I know for me, when I saw this title, I'm like, wow, Ghost Boys. Like, is this talking about, before I even start reading, like, is this talking about the past? Is it talking about the current situations? And you really do a really great job of talking about both, right? And just being able to bring up some really great topics. So can you share, similar to the Ninth Ward, what inspired you to write Ghost Boys?
Well, actually, Ghost Boys was a novel that I didn't want to write. And it was a novel that I didn't first think about it. But my son, as a lot of young Black men and young boys and girls, had hit that age where society decided he was a threat, or he was somehow dangerous, and he was undergoing a lot of microaggressions and racism, and it was having also an effect on his whole self, his mental health. It was just awful. And so I would sometimes just drop information talking to my editor about how I was disappointed in our world and how we hadn't really come far enough in civil rights. And I'd always complain about Trayvon, Tamir Rice, Philando Castile, and now we have new names, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd. And so one day she said to me, Jewell, don't you want to write a book, or do you want to write a book about the death, the murder of young Black boys? I looked at her, and she's a short little Asian woman, and she's actually a fantastic editor. Her name is Alvina Ling. And I looked at her and I said, no.
Exactly. No one wants to write that story.
No one wants to write that story. But one of the things that I think that what makes Alvina a good editor is that she had faith that I could do it well.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So even though I didn't think I could do it, and I have this agreement with her that if the book doesn't come out right, or whatever, we just don't publish it. You want your money back, take your money back, But what made me try were all the young boys and girls who were going through the experiences of my son, coming up and having to know about the talk still in 2020. And so I thought, I've been practicing all these years to write for youth. So, girl, I better get my act together. And but at least I ought to try, I did. And the book nearly killed me. It took me 2.5 years to write. And I would write for like maybe 6 weeks. And the first time I wrote 26 pages and said to my editor, that's it, I'm done. The book is finished. And she said, Jewell, isn't it a little short? And I
You're like, it's a sonnet. It's not really a book.
It's over with.
Yeah.
And for 2.5 years writing it. And then for 6 weeks, I would just like collapse and be very depressed. And then I'd pull myself back up together, and then of course I would have heard about another child who died, and I would try it again. But I think the real key, besides being inspired by the young contemporary boys who are being murdered because of racial bias, I was a little toddler when Emmett Till was murdered.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember, and I wished I hadn't seen them at that age. I was too young. But I remember seeing pictures of Emmett Till's battered body,
Yeah.
in his coffin, and how horrific that was. And it's one of the images that still really haunts me to this day. Like if I close my eyes, I can see it. I can see it clearly. And so I actually mentioned to Alvina, my editor, I think I can write the book if I use ghosts. And she told me a year afterwards that she thought I had lost my mind. But for me, bringing Emmett, and why is Emmett's story being retold with all these new young men? Yeah, over and over again, same story, just different faces. And also for me, why is it that I thought we were making things better? Why is it that I've lived all this long and now I'm a grandmother? And you mean we're still back where we were when I was a toddler, when I was, just a little child? And so that was powerful. And then we got to add in grandmother. Grandmother would say, every goodbye ain't gone. And fewer Black kids have heard that. But it used to be a saying that the space between the living and dead is very thin, So you're somebody could be gone, dead, but they're not gone. Like grandma, I talk to her every day, and she's been dead for 30 years. That sense of spirit and ancestors and elder that sort of remain. And so that's how Emmett became the ghost boy. And then how Jerome has to learn that he's no longer Jerome. He's got to become a part of a ghost boy. And there's a whole crew of boys, who are demanding that the world live a better life, So that's how that came about. But it sounds much more coherent now talking about it than actually what I went through. Like, for example, and then I'll be quiet so you can ask another question. I actually only had Jerome and Sarah. And it wasn't until like a year into the project that, here's my editor again, Alvina says, Jewell, how did Jerome get the gun? And I went, oh yeah, how did he get the gun? And another thing that happens for me in writing is I dream a lot. So I went to bed and had this big dream, and that's how Carlos was born. And then Carlos, of course, brought in the Day of the Dead, which actually I had just read some articles on how Africans had been taken to Mexico, and they were there as slaves. There are almost 2 million Africans as slaves in Mexico. And they probably would have learned with the Mexican Catholics, oh, you believe in All Saints Day, All Souls Day, and spirits? I'm down with that, from their African-based religion. But also the early Mexicans, the descendants of the Aztecs and what have you, they believe literally in Day of the Dead. And Africans said, oh, I'm down with that. The spirits still rise. And so that amalgamation got echoed with Carlos and Jerome being tight and having that sense that across Latino and African-American cultures, there's a respect that the dead aren't just still dead. They are still with us. Yes.
Wow. So many layers, Jewell. So many layers. I mean, especially, for me being from Chicago, the Emmett Till story is something that we take very personal. And having a young Black boy as a son, I have an 8-year-old. And I think all the things you just hit at are so important that if regardless of race, age, I could read these stories and understand that this is somewhat of feels like deja vu, like over and over again, right? And then just being able to learn lessons from your past, but also understanding why it's so important for today. And I love the cross-cultural understanding of it as well, that, we as African Americans, we have a very, very, very trying past and things that I think we're still to this day working through, but understanding that there's other cultures that have had it as well. And so just as you shared there about Carlos, just understanding that we all have to try to figure this thing out together, right? And so Yeah, yeah,
And also, and we can add in Sarah, and I think that actually came from
yeah,
watching the marches of Martin Luther King. That it was a coalition of all kinds of people.
yep,
That it was all kinds of religions, all kinds of people from different ethnic backgrounds, and I think like right now in the Black Lives Matter protest, that we're seeing again a coalition, that it can't be just one group of people advocating for change because you don't have enough power maybe in and of yourself, but we need a coalition of all kinds of people that advocate for change, and then we
yeah,
get that groundswell where change does happen. And it is also connected to, I think, our culture and also all human culture, that you bear witness, that when something's wrong we are supposed to tell that story. So it's a way to cauterize, soothe the pain, and it's a catalyst that keeps us going on to the next. And so Black people in particular who've had the worst of the
exactly.
pain, we made music, we made jazz, we made great poets, Langston Hughes, we made all kinds of we made the first only truly American literary tradition, and that's the slave narrative.
Mm,
We did so much and continue to do so much, so that in our healing of ourselves, we make this wonderful art. We bear witness, tell the stories, and then it also has kept us alive and moving forward, so that we're still here.
yeah, yeah, I love it. I love it. And then we'll get to some of the live reading, just like the responsibility we all hold, right? And so even what you just saying that, as African Americans, there's definitely a negative narrative in a way that we have been able to survive through this. But even bringing up Sarah, that there's a responsibility for her to be a part of change, right? And for that,
Absolutely.
and for all of us to realize where is our opportunity to make a better tomorrow, right?
Absolutely. And that's the line in the novel, that only the living can make the world better. So live and make it better. I feel very much um, death sounds terrible, even though I know people aren't gone. But if you think of even dating back to slavery, when they used to, take slaves that were too ill, maybe to be sold in
Mm,
America, they would just throw them overboard,
yeah.
and they would sell them and treat the value of their life as nothing. And I think of all the millions, that haven't had a chance to live a life.
Mm,
And so part of Ghost Boys too is these ghosts then not just being passive victims, because they're more than that. They are assertive, and they too are making the world better. But they're calling on us, since I can't do it and I'm not here, what excuse do you have not
exactly.
to do better, be better, make the world better? And I think that is the message. We have a great gift. We are alive. I
Mm,
remember being in Ferguson, after the rioting in
mm,
Ferguson and the death, the murder of Michael Brown, and I was in the airport getting ready to come home, and I spoke to this brother in the restaurant, and I said, "How you doing?" And he said, "Every day above ground is a good day," and it was sort of like I had heard that before, but that particular instant, it just so hit me.
yeah,
So we live as though we're afraid to die. We know that people are dying, but it takes the real heart and the guts. And that's why we're such a great people, to live and still create joy and still create art and still speak our mind.
I love it. So I think this is a perfect time, Joe. I'm ready. I'm ready to hear the wonderful piece from Ghost Boys. So again, as you all are watching, share this interview.
Share, share,
And
share.
also, we are about to read from Ghost Boys.
And actually, I think I'm going to go back, and I feel like I ought to read the beginning. And I'm not going to read the section with Peter Pan and Carlos and whatever, but I just feel like I ought to read the beginning. How small I look, laid out flat, my stomach touching ground, my right knee bent, and my brand new Nike stained with blood. I stoop and stare at my face. My right cheek flattened on concrete. My eyes are wide open. My mouth, too. I'm dead. I thought I was bigger, tough, but I'm just a bit of nothing. My arms are outstretched like I was gonna fly like Superman. I'd barely turn, sprinting. Pow, pow, 2 bullets. Legs gave way. I fell flat, hard. I hit snowy ground. Ma's running, she's wailing. My boy, my boy. A policeman holds her back. Another policeman is standing over me, murmuring, it's a kid. It's a kid. Ma's struggling. She gasps like she can't breathe. She falls to her knees and screams. I can't bear the sound. Sirens wail. Other cops are coming. Did someone call an ambulance? I'm still dead, alone on the field. The policeman closest to me is rubbing his head. In his hand, his gun dangles. The other policeman is watching Ma. She's gonna hurt someone. Then he shouts, stay back. People are edging closer, snapping pictures, taking video with their phones. Stay back. The policeman's hand covers his holster. More people come. Some shout. I hear my name. Jerome. It's Jerome. Still, everyone stays back. Some curse, some cry. Doesn't seem fair. Nobody ever paid me any attention. I skated by, kept my head low. Now I'm famous. That was inspired, by the murder of our innocents. And just even in terms of the geography, besides the child being completely, whoa, what is this, and thinking then, like a child, I can outrun a bullet, and of course they can't. But the way that the relationships are torn apart, that a mother not being allowed to get to her son, a boy bleeding out, and no one's called an ambulance, and that whole monstrosity of it. It's sort of like, I take you there, dead, and then we work back to alive, building up to how did it happen? Why did it happen? And then Jerome as a ghost trying to make some meaning or get others to help make more meaning out of what his death has meant. I read that and it sounds all sad, but it's not all sad. This novel also empowers, and in particular, I wanted to empower young people to make things better. And by the very end of the book, and I'm going to go ahead and give this little part away, Jerome is no longer Jerome. He's joined with the ghost crew, and they wander the streets looking for people to tell their stories to sort of wake up their souls to injustice. And he finally says his last words of spoken word poetry. Bear witness, my tale is told. Wake, only the living can make the world better. Live and make it better. Don't let me or anyone else tell this tale again. Peace out, Ghost Boy. Yeah. And I was shocked when he did that. I was shocked that the ending has a lot of other parts to it, but I was shocked because there was a power saying, I've sounded the alarm, I've touched your soul, and now it's up to you, the living, to carry it all forward, and then he goes wandering again, looking for another soul to connect with. That connection also comes out of the fact that when Emmett Till's trial happened, Thurgood Marshall was there. He's our first African-American Supreme Court Justice. Woo, Thurgood. And if you haven't seen Chadwick Boseman in the movie Thurgood, you got to see it. It's an early Thurgood. But Thurgood was actually so light, he could pass for white. So at the Till murder trial, he was down allowed on the bottom floor where all the, the things were happening, And then when they found out that he was, a black man, they sent him up into the balcony. And he was there, and I'm sure he felt the ghost of Emmett Till, the ghost of his murders. And he then dedicated all of his life to fighting, injustice and racial equality. And he became a Supreme Court justice. So out of that ash rises this great figure. And that's what I think our kids can do. They can rise beyond expectations and be great and make a difference in the world.
Yes, I'm over here, all emotions. But I think the one thing you said that I was just sitting here just pondering is the idea of, like, in the book, of him saying, like, I was pretty much looked over and now I'm famous. You know what I mean? And now, with that, but I think it's a really cool way that how do I now use my popularity? I'm going to use my popularity to bring about change. And I think about even currently now, I had a conversation with a friend recently just about, like, Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Blake Jacobs, all these people. It's like, people are like, okay, why did it take them dying to do it?
Yes.
But, and yes, and I'm sure Breonna Taylor, the day before her death, didn't believe that her name would be all across the world right now. The same thing with George Floyd. But however, it has ignited not only just a national uproar, but a global, international, you know what I mean? Just being able to see those incidents. And so I just love what you just said, that, it puts a fire in people of, like, okay, what am I going to do with this emotion that I feel? Like, how am I going to channel this energy in a way that I can never have to feel this again? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm right with you. And when I was actually thinking, as you were saying the names, and Breonna's name was right in my head. They were, people living their everyday life, and who knew that day that they were going to die, or that night that they were going to die, and how horrific that is. And Ghost Boys actually came out 2 years ago. And it was, in fact, on the New York Times bestseller list and made a big splash. And right after George Floyd was murdered, and there was a whole renaissance of people looking for books about what does this all mean. It's been back on the New York Times monthly bestseller list, and the copies are flying out the world, the wazoo, and it's kind of like, I am so sorry that my book is selling well. I really wish that my book was not needed. But the thing that keeps me sort of centered and proud is I wrote this book inspired by real life kids, and in particular, the younger kids. And everybody's talking about the teenagers and the college students and the adults. But our 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, there are very few books that can speak to the moment that we're living in right now. And the book can make a safe place for them to talk to their parents, their teachers, their librarians, their loved ones. And they need to have those conversations. So I'm really glad that the book does exist, though part of me wishes, there should be a world in which no book like mine exists.
Exactly. Just thinking about, the same vein. So the next question I have is just like your research and creative process. And so I know I saw before when you talked about in another interview about sugar, right? And so just like all the different things you did to research for that. The same thing you talked about with the Ninth Ward, you actually being in Louisiana and that igniting you and just all these other things. And you even spoke to how it's helped you with Ghost Boys. Like, how important is it for you to, before you write, that this research process happens that leads your creative process?
The research is really important. And who knew? I didn't know I was interested in history.
Right.
And so I was trying to find out who I was and want to understand my people's history that I just fell in love with it, and it's so important. But history is critical. But I got to tell you, with Ghost Boys, I kept on all the research I did about Emmett Till being murdered and how people are still shooting up the sign that says here was where he was murdered in Money, Mississippi. It's like, what? What are you shooting a sign for? You know,
Yeah.
it's so awful. But everything that I read, books written for youth, for adults, fiction, nonfiction, the things on the television, documentaries, literally they all said that Emmett might have been sassy. He might have been sexually suggestive. And that was why he was murdered. And that's straight out of blame the victim, right? Some say he said, hey, baby, because he learned how to say, hey, baby in Chicago. Some said, he might have whistled at her, Mrs. Carolyn Bryant, the shopkeeper. He had a stutter, so he might have gone, and made a sound like that. Mrs. Bryant said he pushed her up against the wall and was really sexually assaultive of her body. And I kept thinking, no, this can't be true. No young brother that I know of in this life or any other lifetime would behave in such a way. And even if he did, he shouldn't have been killed for it. Does that make me say he deserved to die? But I didn't believe it. But because I read a lot, keep up, and have my spidey sense to pay attention, my book was actually in copy editing. It was getting to the point where they're getting ready to print it. And I discovered, Tyson's book, The Blood of Emmett Till. It just came out, and Carolyn Bryant finally confessed and said he didn't do anything. That Emmett was the innocent that in my gut I believed him to be. And now I had proof. And I had to holler at the publisher and say, give me my book back. And I do think that my book is the only book that shows him not doing, quote, any suggestive stuff that don't in some way imply that he was a victim. He puts the penny, and it's possible that he might have put the money and touched her hand, and that would have been a no-no in the South, and he might not have known that. You're supposed to put your money on the table. But as far as I know, my book is the only book that shows Emmett Till utterly innocent. And so if I hadn't been plugged into research, I would have missed that. And I think I kept looking, and even after the book was, quote, done, I was still looking and still ongoing, trying to resolve things that I needed to know in order to write the story. So that research was very important. And anytime now, like I've had to do some other work, and I won't talk about that, but I had to call out how some people of color were still carrying this false narrative. Well, he might have done something. And I had to speak that basically it's been over 60 years. White people decided the narrative that he was, somehow this suggestive, sassy boy. And even the Till family wondered, did he do something wrong? And that's what's wrong with not knowing your history and also having to change your history or uncover your history, because here, Black people in oral histories thought that young man might have done something wrong. And it's like, oh, gosh. So we got to watch what we get brainwashed with.
Yeah.
And that's why history is so important. And all my stories try to give some history about our culture, like Black mermaids in Bayou Magic. We can talk about that. The water goddesses who are so much better than Ariel, believe me. Because they're real living, caring, giving community mermaids who look after their children who have been captured as slaves. So I always bring in bits of history to empower and to remind us, nobody told you this. They told you Disney got you to buy Ariel and pay money for the tickets to go see Ariel. But you, as a culture, have a mermaid who's better, stronger, than anything, and more significant in her power. And same with ghost boys, that our ghosts have power, and that spirit tradition that came from Africa has power. Our elders, our grandmother, they have power. So that's what I want to remind kids of.
I love it. I love it, Jewel. I'm not even gonna say anything else to that. what what advice do you have for those who are listening? Also, working with young people, we are always encouraging them to share their voice. I believe that it's so important that kids are able to see a variety of writings because they're able to see, like,
Mhm.
ultimately, there is something missing and what could I add to it? And then also being able to be inspired by other people. And so we have people on here. I work with self-published authors who are trying to get in the business. We got kids who want to be in the business, family members watching. What would you say is your advice if someone was like, I want to get to the point where my story is out here, I'm the publisher, I'm an
Okay.
award-winning writer. Like, what do I need to do to
Wow. Okay. And I actually don't know if your listeners know, I've actually been a professor of creative writing at Arizona State for like 35 years. Okay.
So what's so funny, Jewel, is that when I posted that I was interviewing you, someone that I know was like, I went to Arizona State. I remember her. So just so you know, they knew you from the university side, which I was really
Oh,
excited
that's so
to hear.
sweet. That is
Yeah.
so sweet. Well, I gotta tell you one thing, a writer writes. And there's a lot of people who talk about what they're going to do, what they want to do, and all that kind of stuff. But if you don't, sit down and actually do it, what you want doesn't mean anything,
True.
and you don't have to start with big bites. So it gets set up that you need to have the perfect computer. You need to have, the perfect circumstance. You need 4 hours to work. Even if you take these 20 minutes, I'm going to write something these 20 minutes. If you keep doing bit by bit, gradually it'll grow into a book. So I wrote through fertility treatments. I wrote through having my bed rest in the hospital, having my children. And, I would stay up in the middle of the night to write, and then try to be there, of course, as their mama during the day. And I just never stop. So you've got to have the drive to do the work. Once you do the work, I think particularly if you're writing about ethnic, cultural things, writing about women's stories or men's stories regarding the diaspora, publishing is so eager, from everything from picture books to adult nonfiction books, to hear those stories, that literally the Black Lives Matter, and I think this is a great thing too, has inspired a new renaissance. You cannot believe how publishing is finally saying we need more representation.
Mm.
We need to publish these books, and so if you have a manuscript, and if you're a first time author, you got to have the manuscript. Then it's really often very best to have an agent. So for the agent, I can also hook you up, but one of my agency is Distal, Goderich, and Barrett. But just think of Jane Distel, Dystel. She was the agent who wrote to Obama when he was in school at Harvard, and said, "I think maybe you have a book in you." And
Oh wow.
yeah, she's no longer his agent now, but for that first one, she was, okay. But anyway, but she and Lorene Carey is a wonderful Black author, and so many more. And I've been with her for 30 plus years. And in her agency, she has many different agents, so that what they'll do is, like, somebody might say, well, it's not for me. And what you need to know that they're saying is, it's not that you're not necessarily any good. It's about whether they think they can sell it. And in the
Mm.
past, sometimes it was pretty tricky, like with books that I wrote. I'm not sure I could sell Frederick Douglass and His White Mistress and Black Wife, which was one of my adult books. So, but now the market's really breaking open, and they will share it among other agents, and they will submit for you. So when the time comes, you can email me, and I'd be happy to give you those agents' names, other people's agents' name, other agents that I know that are reputable, and you find an agent, and their job is really to find the editor who will say yes to you. And
Mm.
I've had times where I've had it right off the bat. I've had times where I'm in my fifth book in, and it's like it took me 13 no's before I got to the
Mm.
yes. So always remember too, you keep trying and you keep trying until you get to that yes. All you need is one. and not to give up. And while you're waiting for somebody to say yes to you, what do? You write another book.
You need to be writing.
I know many people. I got my first book, and then before they know, 3 years have passed by, and they're still waiting to sell that first one. And sometimes you sell your second one. Anyway, it's a complicated process, but I do think that self-publishing is a wonderful thing, that you can actually make money at it. And if the does well, sometimes a big publisher will say, oh, we got to help you, because they figure they can make money off of you. But I always believe you should start with who's going to pay you first. So I start, you going to pay me to do something I'm going to do anyway? Okay. Which is why I start with self-publishing. But it does turn out that when I started publishing, they didn't have ebook rights written to contracts. So several books, I owned the ebook rights because nobody bothered to buy them. And so I published them on Amazon myself. And you pretty much necessarily can't tell the difference. But the difference is that instead of getting 30% of the royalty, I get 75%. And
Oh, wow.
the other rest goes to Amazon. So there is money to be made. And here's an example, which I wish I had known this. J.K. Rowling, when she published, she'd gotten so many no's to Harry Potter. No. And then she got her one yes. And ebooks weren't a big deal, but they asked for it. And she says, no, I'm not going to sell it. So every time you buy any one of those 10 Harry Potter books, or how many they are, as an ebook, the bulk of that money goes straight to her.
Oh, wow.
I wish, yeah. But yeah, I was like, whoa, smart.
You're right.
And you also have to be a business person. And you can look at my 2 books, Writing Lessons for Black Authors, which is basically an intermediate, beginning, advanced book on how to write fiction using examples from the African American tradition. You could also get, my book on the African American nonfiction for how to write nonfiction that also uses Black examples. So those are like early, how do you do things kind of books. I do think you can teach how to make somebody a better writer. And those books, they don't promise that you're going to get published, but they really, I do believe, will teach you skills that I've used in the classroom to make strong writers. And actually, I have a lot of special students that are out there writing. And one of them, I'm very proud of, is a woman called Tiari Jones, her book American Marriage was an Oprah book this summer.
Oh, wow.
And Mary also wrote Leaving Atlanta, about the child murders in Atlanta. That was her first book. And she came from Georgia to study with me at Arizona State. And on her 4th book, her career really, really took off. So, I mean, that's just to say, I do know how to teach. And I do think my books are really worthwhile. And not now, but maybe in about 5 years now, my daughter and I were thinking about having like a summer residency, like Hobby Cannon has for Black poets, but a summer residency just to help nurture all the young voices that are coming through in our community.
Oh, see, that goes to my what next. You have to do that, Jewell. Like I literally was listening to you myself. So as you know, here in Chicago, I have a nonprofit, but I have always wanted to write a children's book, like I have. Yeah. And me and my son, especially during this time being at home, I'm like, we have no excuse. Like we're at home. Yes. God has slowed us down so that we're able to focus and get some things in order. And so I'm listening to you, and you just said some amazing advice, because I can feel like I have all these things to do. But you're like, even if it's 10 minutes, you just need to write.
I got to tell you, sometimes because writing can be hard. Sometimes I'll say, I just want a really good paragraph. And I get a really good paragraph, and it's like, okay, I'm done,
Yeah.
I also count dreaming time when I'm sleeping, dreaming. And also when I'm walking the dogs, I'll be thinking about how the story works in my mind. Or when I'm doing the dishes, like the little girl in Sugar came to me when I was doing the dishes. So you just keep your imagination twirling and thinking about the book. And that to me counts as writing too. I think writing, I used to think I had to write every day. and 4 or 5 hours a day. And then I realized that's primarily, rich white men who have wives to take care of them, and that's not going to happen for me. And so I just I just take small steps. And it's really funny that there are people that I work with who have done maybe 4 books in 30 years,
Mm.
don't have young kids or didn't have young kids. They have summers off because we're professors, and they talk about all the time how they don't have enough time to really write a book. And I think, yeah, I'm like, well, girl, I know I'll probably read or whatever. I'm working on a picture book right now about steps.
Mm.
I just submitted actually a new adult novel called Slave Girl, which is going
Mm.
out to publishers. And I just finished a book about climate change and wildfires,
Oh,
which,
wow.
yeah, Paradise on Fire, about a Black girl who goes to a camp in California and some other Black kids. It's based on a true program, a nonprofit in DC. And they discover that they're really good at nature, that they're really good. Oh, I can water raft, I can hike, I can climb a mountain. And when you go to the national parks, particularly in the West, you don't see any children of color. And
Mm.
so there's glory and skills and landscapes that children of color might just be so happy with and change and say, well, I'm going to be a forest ranger, or I'm going to be an environmental scientist, but they never have the opportunity to see it or to see the West. And there's a group called City Kids where they take kids of color and they spend every summer for 4 years. It's a big, long program. They basically teach them how to be, all those like images of those survival and hiking, nature, Girl
Yeah.
Scout, Boy Scout kind of kids. And it's about these Black inner city kids who get stuck in a California wildfire, and they have to discover how to save themselves. And this one girl is really good at maps, and she can see things visually. And she's part African and African American, and her name is Aduago, and they call her Addie. And Aduago is for daughter of the Eagles. So it's Aduago Addie who can like just see and has this gift of how the landscape and how the road and how the fire is going to go. And she ends up being the one that saves her crew.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Oh,
Yeah.
wow. I'm just like, oh my gosh, so many
Girl
books.
power.
Right,
Yeah.
girl power. I mean, everything. So, as you see at the bottom, you all, this is how you can continue to follow Miss Jewell. She is amazing. I'm just grateful to even have this time to talk with you,
I'm
Jewell.
grateful for you. You're so gracious and so kind.
Oh,
I was late, y'all. I
it is
was
okay. Life, I mean, when I tell, and I get it's so funny because I think, but each time I do one of these interviews, either myself or the other person, we're like, whoo, I'm so glad we made it here because this day has been a day.
Yes. And you know where I'm at, don't you? I'm in Seattle.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we've got the wildfire smoke. We have the second worst air quality in the nation.
Wow.
So besides the pandemic, everything out there is gray. It actually does look like when I was in China. And the Chinese folks, when they came to Arizona, they said, oh, blue sky. They had never seen it, literally, because it's so dirty. And actually, literally, you can't see our sky. You can't see the water.
Wow.
I feel like I'm like in a zombie movie or an apocalyptic movie or something's going to go crazy.
Oh my God, this is such interesting times, man.
Yeah.
Like, very interesting. But I just want to say thank you so much for this time, Jewell. At the bottom, everyone who's watching now, who may watch later, you see her Instagram, you see her website. Go purchase all of these amazing titles that she said that she has written, and then books that you have coming out. I'm so excited for. And again, just thank you so much for this opportunity to have a conversation with you. We're going to put in the link afterwards how you all can put in for copies of Ghost Boy. Get it. I'm so excited. Like I said, I have an 8-year-old and we're going to read it. I think it's just a great conversation piece and something that will be definitely a part of our home library. So thank you, Jewell, for this time.
Thank you very much. And you were wonderful. And anytime, girl. And next time I'm gonna give you my phone number so you can call me up and say,
Email me your photos. Let me just email. That's all I got is the email.
And I'll send you 6 autographed copies of my book. So send me your address that you can share with your readers. If you want to set just for you and your son, I'll do that too. But I appreciate you. I appreciate your audience. And I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. We will definitely be in touch. Have a great rest of your evening.